You ever reach that point where someone corners you so completely that you realize it's time to act fast or risk finding out what they'll pull next? I've been there, and this is how it went down. Welcome to Civic Chronicles. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the juiciest HOA showdowns. Drop your location and comment. Let's see how far this story reaches around the world. It all began when Melinda, our self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, slipped a letter into my mailbox, her bold, looping signature plastered across the bottom like a royal seal. The notice claimed that starting the following week, the HOA board had approved inspections of residents' mailboxes to ensure no disruptive or unsafe materials were being delivered. I stared at the page, half convinced it had to be a bad joke. But no, this was classic Melinda, operating at full control freak capacity. She'd officially crowned herself the postal police. I reread it twice, certain my brain was malfunctioning. A privacy breach, plain as day. Who gave her the authority to rummage through personal correspondence? Since when did HOA rules override federal law? My thoughts were a whirlwind. Part of me wanted to rip the letter to shreds right there. Another part wanted to march straight to an attorney. But instead, I chose a more measured route. Confront her directly and see what kind of bizarre logic she'd use to justify this stunt. This wasn't about community safety, it reeked of control. The next morning, I strode across the street to her place. It looked exactly as you'd picture it, lawn trimmed like a golf course, hedges sculpted within an inch of their lives, and a lineup of ceramic gnomes standing guard like a tiny militia. She opened the door wearing that syrupy, insincere smile that always made my pulse spike. I handed her the letter, asked who in the world approved this ridiculous rule, and waited for something resembling a sane explanation. Spoiler alert, none came. Quick note before we dive deeper. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Melinda's face tightened the moment I questioned her. She folded her arms, lifted her chin like a monarch addressing a commoner, and said, "The rule's been approved. It's for the safety of the neighborhood. You'd be wise to follow it." Just like that, dismissive, cold, and dripping with arrogance, as though my rights were some inconvenience. My jaw locked so tight I could hear my teeth creak. I pushed again, demanding to know which board members signed off on this lunacy. She smirked and replied, "That information is internal HOA business." The smugness rolling off her was almost physical. It took everything in me not to explode right there on her pristine front porch. She craved total control and expected everyone else to behave like well-trained pets. I wasn't about to play along, but I couldn't go it alone. I knocked on doors, spoke with neighbors one by one. Surely they wouldn't accept someone rifling through private mail. I was right about that part. Most were furious. The problem was fear. "It's easier to let her have her way," one neighbor murmured, eyes flicking toward Melinda's house like she expected cameras to blink back. Another exhaled and said, "She targets anyone who speaks up. Not worth the trouble." Their terror made my stomach twist. We were adults being pushed around by a bored tyrant with too much time and a power complex. When the so-called rule took effect, I kept watch. It didn't take long to spot Melinda on her rounds, playing the part of an officious inspector. She'd loiter by the cluster of mailboxes, pretending to look around, then linger just a fraction, too long at one of them. Mine. Seeing. Her hover over my box sent heat through my veins. My mail belonged to me, not to her. In that moment, I decided the charade had to stop. If my neighbors were too frightened to act, I would take matters into my own hands, and not with a bland lawsuit. Melinda needed a lesson she wouldn't forget. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, mapping options like a commander planning an assault. Bolting the box shut wouldn't work. She'd complain about unauthorized changes. Videoing her could be spun as neighborhood vigilance. I needed something clever, theatrical, and undeniable. A grin crept across my face. Maybe it was time Melinda started dreading my mailbox. Once the idea settled in, it wouldn't leave. I wanted her to loathe that metal box so intensely she wouldn't dare set foot near it again. Then I thought of Marcus, an old friend who kept bees. He treated hives like companions, calm and unflappable. If anyone could pull off an audacious but effective stunt, it would be him. I rang Marcus, explained everything, and to my surprise, he didn't laugh. "You want bees in your mailbox?" he asked, then let out a quiet chuckle. It sounded crazy, and maybe it was. but it just might work. Within the hour, Marcus arrived carrying a small wooden crate with air holes, the sort of thing a beekeeper hauls when moving a hive. From inside came a soft, restless buzz like a sleeping crowd waiting for a cue. From the street, it looked like any other delivered box, ideal lure for a meddlesome neighbor. That evening, I eased the crate into my mailbox, tucking it so it sat flush and unnoticed. I wiped my palms on my jeans, equal parts nervous and exhilarated. The plan was simple. If anyone else approached, I'd step in. I wasn't trying to injure some random passerby, just force Melinda to get a taste of her own invasive behavior, to make sure there was no he said, she said later. I re-aimed my security camera so the mailbox was in sharp focus. 2 days passed in silence. Melinda must have been plotting her next overreach. Then on the third afternoon, as the sun began to soften, I saw her across the street, her floral frock bobbing with each determined step, clipboard tucked under her arm, sunglasses on like a badge. My pulse picked up as she crossed the lawn. She hesitated, glanced around, then bent toward the row of mailboxes with the deliberate manner of someone checking boxes for infractions. I leaned forward at the monitor as she lifted the flap and reached inside. The instant her hand disturbed the crate, pandemonium spilled out. A golden swarm poured free, a living cloud roaring with movement. Melinda screamed as a high, panicked sound that made me wince, and the swarm descended. She thrashed, clawing at her hair, staggering backward until she fell sideways onto the pavement. The insects swarmed over her arms and face, driving her into a frantic, grotesque dance as she ran down the avenue, slapping at herself in blind terror. My camera recorded every chaotic second in crystal detail. I sat back, heart pounding and a grin creeping across my face. Melinda was performing like a woman possessed, sprinting past hedges and driveways, her limbs windmilling. One by one, neighbors poked their heads out of doors and windows. Phones were already up and recording. Her flowery dress caught on a hedge, tearing as she tumbled across the grass, still shrieking. The bees weren't pulling punches. They gave her the full royal treatment. Stings everywhere her hands couldn't reach. It was as if poetic justice itself had a new payroll. She finally crumpled on a neighbor's front yard, gasping, puffed up and slapping at invisible enemies. By then, the swarm had scattered, their job seemingly complete. Neighbors poured out, shouting questions. But Melinda's replies were a garbled mix of bees, mailbox, and trap. While she wailed, I slipped calmly back indoors and picked up my phone, not to call pest control, but the postal inspector's office. I reported a trespasser tampering with my mailbox and mentioned I had clear video proof. They said an officer would be dispatched immediately. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. By the time Melinda was sitting upright, wrapped in towels and clutching, ice packs offered by a sympathetic but unmistakably entertained neighbor, a dark sedan pulled up. A tall man in a crisp suit stepped out, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade. He introduced himself, asked for my footage, and I gladly queued up the high-definition clip. Melinda opening my mailbox, followed by her spectacular encounter with the hive. The crowd watching nearly folded with laughter. Melinda, blotchy and swollen, pointed a trembling finger in my direction. "He framed me! He planted those bees!" she yelled, voice cracking. The inspector adjusted his glasses, with the kind of patience reserved for professionals, dealing with nonsense. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "tampering with another person's mailbox is a federal offense. That's mail theft." Her jaw dropped, the fight draining out of her. He continued, explaining the fine for the violation. When he stated the number, $700, her expression froze somewhere between disbelief and despair. I leaned back on my porch, lifted my coffee mug, and took a slow sip as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The neighborhood buzzed with murmurs, half pity, half satisfaction. For the first time in weeks, everything felt quiet again. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more wild HOA tales. What do you think? Did she finally get what she deserved? Drop your thoughts below.